Good evening, everybody. Warm welcome to the Star Auditorium. I'm Chris Durkin, I'm director of Tate Modern, and I love, just like you, I love photobooks. Tonight we are to mark the launch of the Photobook, A History, Volume 3. As you know, there have been two other ones already. In 2004 we had the Photobook, A History, Volume 1. In 2006 it was Volume 2. And now Volume 3, which was published by Faden. By the way, who is not working here tonight for Faden? Because I've seen so many of you. We are here to mark the launch of number 3, which was already launched in March of this very year. The French poet and writer Gustave Mallarmé, he already predicted, and he already said and believed in the 19th century that everything good will sooner or later end up in a book. And that's how it goes also with good photographs. And we know that there are many, many good photographs. And I'm not just talking about those which you see on white cubes on a wall, glazed behind big glasses. I'm talking about many, many different kinds of photographs. And of course, the fact that we now talk about photobooks, we see them in festivals. Many of you come back from the Bristol Photobook Festival, which happened this weekend. We see them in festivals, we see them popping up in art fairs, we have even photobook fairs, we have photobook symposia, we have also collectors specialized in photobooks. I mean, some of them are here tonight. That's, of course, also basically the fold of two gentlemen which are sitting over there. And that's the fold of an architect, Gerry Badger. He also happens to write about photography. The fold of an anthropologist, Martin Parr. He also happens to make photographs and photobooks. And it's also a little bit the fold of other pioneers. And Hannah Watson sitting there, she's director since 2005 of Trolley Books. And as you know, Trolley Books is publishing really one of the worldwide best fine photobooks, very special photobooks. But Simon Baker, our photography curator, who also loves photobooks, he will introduce further the speakers and he will moderate the debate. Mr. Parr and Mr. Badger, they believe that photobooks are the quote-unquote supreme platform to disseminate the work and ideas of photographers. And when we say supreme platform, indeed that is true, but maybe tonight we should also discuss about the fact why there are so many photobooks, and sometimes the photobook is only just made in order to promote an exhibition, or the exhibition is there to promote the photobook. There are many different kinds of photobooks today. But Tate loves and believes in photobooks. We connect our exhibitions, our displays, our acquisitions, often on photobooks. And again, that's mainly thanks to the work here of our curators, our photographic curatorial department led by Simon Baker. When you think of Klein Moriyama, the format of the show was entirely based on the photobooks of Mr. Moriyama and Mr. Klein. But also when you look at exhibitions at Tate Britain, Chris Killip, but also the recent display of Chris Shaw, it's based and connected to photobooks. And often when we talk about acquiring photographs, we now have to say we acquire photobooks. Think about major acquisitions which are connected to photobooks by Japanese artists, Daido Moriyama, Farewell Photography, Yutaka Takanashi, towards the city, and other examples are manifold. And also our next exhibition, Conflict and Time, there will be a large portion of the exhibition, a large chapter dedicated to the photo book. And often in these exhibitions, these books are coming from Martin Parr. Indeed, Martin, not only as an anthropologist, he has been incredibly instrumental to bring to our attention what the photo book can do. And not just today, but also in history. And that's incredibly important, not only for the museum, these museums which are dedicated to photography, but I think also to those museums who really think, what should we do in order to disseminate these ideas, in order to engage our audiences. And I consider photo books as also a very important and new way to engage many different audiences. Ladies and gentlemen, Simon Baker, Hannah Watson, Martin Parr, and Gerry Badger. Thank you for coming tonight.
So, Chris, thanks very much for that fantastic introduction. I have a few words more of introduction to introduce the format of the evening, but I thought I would also say how our discussion will work. Martin and Gerry and Hannah will all talk for sort of 10, 15 minutes each about, first of all, to introduce the book that we're here to talk about, and also Hannah's going to respond to some of the ideas that are raised in this amazing new publication. And then we will have a discussion more between ourselves, and then we'd like to leave a lot of time open for questions from the audience. So rather than waiting to the end and getting stuck, think as you go along of the things that you want to ask the famous eminent anthropologist Martin Parr, and Gerry and Hannah, things that you have questions as you go along, please keep them, and there'll be a good opportunity later to ask them. I was reading, by way of preparation for this evening, I was reading the introduction to Volume 3, which is an amazing book. It's full of very different kinds of ways of thinking about the photo book, and I think it's something that will come out hopefully in the discussion, that it's almost as if having established this field of the photo book as you did in the first 2 volumes, you're now free to kind of play a little bit more and to think a little bit more about different themes and approaches and different kinds of photography that the photo book is a particularly brilliant way of understanding. I also noted something that you said, Martin, in the introduction, which is that you had previously felt like a missionary preaching to a skeptical audience. So I hope you feel that you're no longer in that sort of missionary, I was going to say position, but that's not a very good thing to say, is it? You're no longer in the role of a missionary in relation to photo books. You have a non-skeptical, incredibly enthusiastic audience now, and the Photo Book Festival in Bristol this weekend was a really great place to see a lot of, not only to see the side of photo books that maybe is a little bit difficult for all of us, which is the incredibly collectible, expensive, rare books that Martin and Gerry have been writing about, but also to see new, younger artists, self-published books, people making maybe their first book or publishing things in an affordable and accessible way. And I think this is something that's really, really vital for us as a museum, but also for photography in general. It's a very difficult culture at the moment for young photographers. It's hard to get shows in galleries. It's hard to have your work seen. And the photo book is becoming a really, really important way for new things to come out, as well as a way of reconsidering the history of the medium of photography. So I think those two things are balanced very, very well in Volume 3, and I hope we'll talk about that. The idea of looking backwards and maybe understanding the rare and wonderful things that were published, say, in Japan or Latin America in the 60s or 70s, and then things that have come out right now and that are really exciting. And the great thing about photo books is that we in this room can all be photo book collectors. We can all go to good photo book shops, of which there are many in London. There's Donlan Books, there's Claire de Rouen, there's Koenig, there's our bookshop indeed. Please go to our bookshop and buy some books. It's important to support the Tate in that way. There's a photographer's gallery, obviously. So there are great places to find new things and new books. And this democratic side of photo books is really, really exciting. And I brought just by way of an illustration, because I think there'll be a lot of talking and there'll be a few slides, but it's really nice. Somebody's cricket has gone off. So at Bristol at the weekend, I met this photographer, Nicolo de Georgis, and this is his book, Hidden Islam. It's an amazing book. I'd never seen it before. I'd never heard of him before. Martin, as he so often does, dragged me over and said, "Look at this. This is amazing. Look inside." Like, you open up the book, and then there's like these photographs of the outsides of mosques, and then you open it up, and it's kind of a color image of the inside of the mosque. This is a really beautiful self-published book, and something that has a particular, is able to give a particular visibility to this photographer's work, because it's within this context of photo books. So I think we should think historically, but also about the contemporary, what's being made now, what's happening now. And it's a great thing in Volume 3 that you have engaged a lot with very recently published things and with younger photographers' work, and something that's very, very exciting. The last thing I really wanted to say is, for us all as a community of enthusiasts, to think a little bit about the future and what's going to happen in the future. The unimaginatively named Volume 3 may lead on to unimaginatively named Volume 4. But the really key thing is not so much that sense of taking stock, but really what's going to happen in the future on the basis of this work. And I mean that in several ways. And the first thing is a bigger audience for photobooks, so more people being interested in buying them, in sharing them, more people publishing them, certainly, and hopefully Hannah's going to talk a little bit about this, the context for publishing photobooks now as a publisher, but also what the study of photobooks will look like in the future, because clearly volumes 1, 2, and 3 are giving us they're giving us the first glimpse of a huge subject. You can't imagine a book being published in 2012 called A History of Painting, Volume 3. You know, it's just the beginning of study. And really, what I imagine for the future is a really exciting world where you have academics writing their PhDs on a certain small area of maybe one of the things that Martin and Gerry have drawn our attention to, and really investigating, as well as the visual side of the material, investigating the texts. You know, there's a lot of Japanese, there's a lot of Chinese. None of us, I think, read any of those languages. There's a lot of detail and information within these amazing things that we're having our attention drawn to. And this is something that suggests a really exciting future, not only in publishing, but in academic research, and also for the museum. And Chris mentioned the Klein Moriyama show. This, I have to say, I'm in front of everybody here, this was an idea that originally came from Martin. We were walking along and he was talking about photobooks, which he does quite a lot. And he said, well, you know, everyone talks about the Americans all the time being a really important photo book, but really Klein's New York was more influential. It went into Japan. It had this kind of really amazing effect all over the world. It went to Latin America. So the idea of Klein Moriyama was really, let's show how a photo book, and in Klein's case, you know, a small series of photo books, have a really great effect on a global level. And whilst Klein fairly straightforwardly said that he didn't really give a shit what they did in Japan after he'd made his amazing photo book, Moriyama was really, really fascinated with this idea that the photo book was something that he was at the beginning of his work. Seeing Klein's New York, Martin was absolutely spot on. It was really a very, very important moment for him. But then it continued in his practice. So in the exhibition, as Chris said, many of which were from Martin's collection, you saw so many incredible photo books that Moriyama had made over a long period of time. And he's still publishing now. You know, he must be up to 130, 140 books by now.
Region, yeah.
So
he's ahead of me.
He's ahead of, yeah. See, the only...
Another day, another dido.
Yeah. the only problem Martin has, he has spent so much time buying other people's books that he fails to publish enough himself. But,
I know, I wouldn't say that actually, Simon. I wouldn't manage to keep that up okay.
But so that's by way of a short introduction to the content for the evening. I'll hand over to Martin, I think, to begin the discussion, and then Gerry, and then Hannah.
I think the whole project started really to do with the hiring of the status of the photography book within the photographic cultural spectrum, because you know, I'm a photographer, I know many other photographers, and I know that in terms of my own career, perhaps the biggest education I've ever had is by looking at and getting excited by other photographers' books. If you like, you know, when I saw first things like The Americans by Robert Frank way back in the early 70s, those early 60s books from Freelander and Winogrand, these were the things that got me really excited. And it struck me that in the history of photography, which is invariably written by theoreticians and academics, the book really had been marginalized. It hadn't really been looked at. And I think part of this whole idea and concept was to try and reposition the book as being an integral part of our photographic history. And I think to a certain extent, you know, we've been vindicated, and indeed the Klein Dido show is a great example. And the very fact that here we are in the High Cathedral of Art in the UK, and we're actually dedicating an evening just to talking about the photo book, that in itself is an achievement. And this, to me, is absolutely the crucial point, because the other thing that follows in its wake, which is very exciting, is that because we start to dig around and discover not only the books that are well known, and in a sense we've done that, we've established that there are certain books which are very acknowledged in the history of photography. We've been able to deal with those in the first 2 volumes. So in volume 3, we've been able to explore a bit more. But having got those out, into the world, you then find something else really interesting happens. You get a different history emerging. We start to see the patterns of influence. We talked to, I went to Eko Hozoe in Japan, and he met Ed van der Elsken. There's another connection, a bit like the Klein-Dyer thing. And it's because of him meeting van der Elsken, there was some reaction and intermingling of ideas between Europe and America, hugely important in terms of the development of the history of photography in Japan. These traces and these networks hadn't really been talked about, so we're able to bring these up. And Gerry and I think of our books as being revisionist histories. So we're able, if you like, to add a new dimension to the history of photography. And the history of photography is subjective. It's always changing. And look how, for example, we view color photography very differently to what we did 30 years ago. Look at how the repositioning of vernacular photography has been so crucial to how you read photography, say, in the last 30 years. So the photobook is now making a big contribution to that. And I just want to tell you, the next book that I'm working on about photobooks will be about Chinese photography. I started going to China regularly about 9 or 10 years ago, and together with someone who I met, who I knew, a guy called Ruben Lundgren, who's part of Wassing Lundgren, who's a Dutch photographer, because he spoke Chinese, Mandarin, he was able to take me around the flea market in Beijing, and I started collecting Chinese books. And I realized immediately that here was another hidden history. Here was something that had been locked away that people didn't know about, and I got very excited about this. And for the last 8 or 9 years, we've been collecting these Chinese books, and Ruben goes on the internet, so we've done it through dealers. We realized there was a huge volume of books written in Japanese, because the Japanese, of course, invaded China in the 30s, and that produced a lot of books. So we're able now, if you like, to put together a different history that had been entirely overlooked and forgotten. So this, to me, this whole process is very exciting. And I think that is as much to do with it. It's not just saying, take the photo book seriously. I think we're doing that, but also what comes in its wake, and that's the exciting thing. And just this weekend in Bristol, we had a little talk about Spanish and photography books and Portuguese books, and this too was hidden. And these curators and photographers from Portugal were discovering the books that they found. And now I expect and imagine in 5 years' time there'll be a book about Portuguese and Spanish photography. Well, one on Spain is coming out this summer with Horacio Fernandez, but it's only 30 books. And constantly we are evolving this sense of discovery, and it's very exciting. So I think we should go to Gerry, because what Gerry's going to do now is to try and lay out how Volume 3 was different to Volume 1 and 2. So Gerry, take it away.
Right, yes. When we finished Volumes 1 and 2, we had no idea that there'd be a Volume 3, so it was rather a shock when it was mooted by Phaidon. Can you do a Volume 3? Because in a sense, we'd written our history in 2 volumes. So how to add to that? We knew that Volume 3 had to be different from Volumes 1 and 2, but it also had to relate. And after a lot of talking, discussion, looking at books, we came up with the idea. Books had come out of the woodwork since we'd done the first 2 volumes. I mean, historical books, people kept telling us about books. We were learning more and more about even the history of Japanese books. Although we'd done a chapter on Japanese books, we were still learning more. We were learning all the time. So we came up with this structure. In Volume 2, we ended Volume 2 with a kind of polemic about photo books. We'd had chapters on Japanese books, American books. We'd had chapters on genres like the company photo book or the artist book and things like that. And actually in chapter 9, I think it was, of Volume 2, we threw that out the window and we just looked at a load of great contemporary photo books, whether they were artist books, whether they were conceptual books, whether they were documentary, we didn't care. Where they were from, we didn't care. Because I think we can now say we have a kind of global photographic culture. So we just threw everything into the pot and we said, well, no matter how these photographers do it, whether it's conceptually, whether it's in the form of an artist book, whether they're documentary, what photography really is about is recording modern life, reflecting modern life. however directly, however abstrusely. In a sense, in the history of photo books, you're actually talking about not just the history of photography, an alternative history of photography, but a history of the times in which those books were made. And this was always very evident to Martin and I when we had books from all over the place, all stretched out from a particular period, just how much these books reflected the zeitgeist. So we came up with this structure. What we would do is we would expand that chapter 9, and we'd take issues that have consumed photographers, and we went back to the wars, back to the Second World War, so we could hoover up books that we'd missed and books that came to light. And in a sense, we're actually creating a history of our times, you know, because both of us almost go back to the Second World War. And we came up with a series of issues, of things that consume photographers that go into the making of the contemporary photo book, and this is where the contemporary bit comes in. And we had 9 things. In a way, you could say the whole thing was, we had, in this book, we've got something old, something new, something borrowed, and we certainly, if you look in the chapter on desire, something blue. But the 9 issues we came up with were propaganda, protest, desire, society, place, conflict, memory, identity, and then the medium itself, because there's a tremendous amount of work at the moment being done about the medium itself. I think that's the 9. Anyway, these things go into the making of the contemporary photo book. And we're going back to the war. I mean, we went back pre-war in a couple of cases. Martin has this wonderful Palestinian protest book from 1934, where the Palestinians are protesting against the nasty British, but they have to sell their oranges, because at that time it was the Palestinians who grew the Jaffa oranges. They had to sell their oranges in London, so in this protest book you also get these wonderful adverts about where you can sell your oranges, and adverts for English goods like Mansfield Hotspur football boots. And this is great thing about the photo book. It's not just, it's very often, of course, it's about photographers expressing themselves, but it is also this kind of thing. We are interested where these books interact with socio-cultural history, and this was a great example. It's not the world's greatest photo book in terms of the photography, but it's terrific in terms of just as a kind of socio-historical document. It's fascinating. So this is basically the thread of volume 3, where we're getting all these issues. Then, as we were doing it, several things kind of came to light. We trail certain themes throughout the whole book, and I think the 2 most important, which I mentioned in the introduction, are, the first one is what we call the personalization of photography. Photography's got more and more personal, and it began with, I guess, with Frank and Klein, a stream of consciousness photography. In fact, art has. In fact, it's not just photography. I think collective ideology was shown to have failed with the war, so after the war, everybody went into themselves. So you've got action painting, stream of consciousness, writing, cinema verite, and so on. And photography follows this pattern as well. So we go through from, the key quotation was John Sarkowski when he did a show called New Documents, and he said that there's a new generation of photographers. They're not interested in changing the world, but simply in knowing it. And then that went through, and you have diaristic photography, Nan Goldin, Danny Lyon. It comes all the way through to the selfie, which that's a word which wasn't mentioned in volume 3. We're proud to say, aren't we, Martin? But it goes all the way through, and now the reporter isn't making an objective documentation of war. It's my diary when embedded with the troops. And in fact, it just very quick aside, I've now been dragged into this Chinese project, and I was looking at Cartier-Bresson's a book when he went to China when the communists came in, and he made a book called The Two Faces of China before. I can't remember the title of it, but he actually photographed, he was there at the time the communists took over in China. And you know what he says in the introduction? He says, "This is my photo diary of my time in China." It must be the first time somebody used that word in terms of documentary, reportage photography. So that was the kind of main theme running through the whole book. As you come through, you get identity and memory as the later chapters. And just very quickly, I'll finish now. And the other one was our friend John Gossage, an American photographer, who initially gave us a great definition of what the good photo book should be. I was talking to him about something, and we were talking about where you sequence books and stuff like that. You put this picture before that one after, so on and so forth. He said, "You can do what you like. It's all fiction." And that, I think, is the other big theme in the book. It's all fiction. Doesn't mean to say photographers aren't trying to tell a truth, but they can do what they like because it is all fiction, and that's one of the wonderful things about photography and the photo book.
Thank you. Maybe should we discuss a little bit this before we move over and look at your presentation?
Okay.
I think it's probably a good moment, because you've both said things which, but please, if you want to ask too before we come on to this, you've both said that you felt that you took the last part of the second book as a kind of way of opening up what had happened now. What really interests me is the relationship between what, once you've got these sections, so propaganda, protest, so on, do they all enable you to be, let's bear in mind that most people here haven't seen the book yet, so I guess we need to describe it a little bit more. Do they all enable you to go through time from the Second World War to now, or some of them ended up being more historic?
Generally, I think the later chapters do tend to be more contemporaneous. But one of the oh God, it's a book. Martin seems to have the only copy in the world. A book I would love. In the very last chapter, we start off with an extraordinary book by a gay Swiss. I think he was a cultural writer, but he was mad about cycling. We're about to start the Tour de France. He was mad about cycling, I guess, men in shorts and things like that. And he collected newspaper cuttings before the war, and in 1943 he publishes this book where he cuts out these pictures from newspaper cuttings, but then he reproduces the crudest kind of photography, then he reproduces it as an exquisite artist portfolio in gravure and transforms it totally. And then the book isn't overtly gay, and it's a very subliminal gay subtext in it, if there is one at all. But he loved pictures of crashes, chute, the French call them, where everybody stops and the guy's comrade comes up and he helps him up and they put their arms around each other. So it's an extraordinary, wonderful, great design of a book, and quite moving in a funny way. There's this kind of subliminal gay subtext going on at a time. We're in the middle of the war. We're at a period when probably it wasn't really kind of the most trendy thing to be gay in Switzerland. So that's the kind of thing we find.
And of course, previously, his contribution to the whole genre of taking vernacular images and representing them and making them into almost like an art form. You could call it an artist's book in a sense, couldn't you? That his contribution to that would be entirely unacknowledged. No one would even think to consider it.
It was just so early. It's 30 years before Hans-Peter Feldman, and loads of people have done the same thing. 25 years at least before Ed Ruscha started making bad photographs and reproducing them in artist books and things. So it was, this wonderful thing. But it was great the way that 1943 book related to what's going on now.
The idea of the sort of overlooked and the ignored, there's also something in there which is really fascinating, which is in the propaganda section, for example, you're looking at work, not entirely, but very often produced by totalitarian regimes, which tend not to be, I wouldn't want to say celebrated, but they tend not to be considered because of the sort of negative politics associated with them. We all know John Hartfield, we all know the sort of the anti-totalitarian imagery, But the propaganda section is really fascinating for this, for you thinking about the design and the intelligence behind it.
You know, Rodchenko and Lisitsky are quite well established, and you know, you have a good collection of posters from that era here. While as, for example, since we finished the book, one of the things I've been really discovering is Italian fascist books, and they're quite amazing. And the reason why I started collecting this more seriously this year, because I finally found someone in Italy who actually knew what was going on. I mean, this is an area that is so obscure and so hidden that it was impossible to find anyone who knew anything about it, let alone find the shops where you could buy this material. And if you go to Italy, there's nothing about it. You know, I've had searches done in Italian on the internet as well, and it's just ignored because of course, you know, no one wants to be connected with the Mussolini regime, so it's been absolutely hidden.
Forward saying, "Oh yeah, I collect fascist books." Yeah.
No, they're not. No, I mean, when you go to bookshops there, they sort of look at you rather strangely. Yeah. I mean, there are a few specialist people who have collected these, but it's been hidden and suppressed within that society. While there's all it is very similar. I mean, much of the design is not dissimilar to what Lisitsky did in Russia in the 30s, in the same period. You know, they're all watching each other and copying, and Salazar in Portugal the same.
And do you think this is something that, you know, for a museum, do you think this is something that will add another history back in again?
Totally, because when you start to see, I don't know if you've been down yet and seen, because Simon's a regular visitor to Bristol. I can't remember I've shown you the Italian.
A couple of the Italian
yes,
ones,
I mean, when you see them, they're mind-blowingly good. And it's just, I mean, I feel guilty that Gerry and I didn't include anything further from Italy in Volume 3. So that's all the more reason in 10 years' time to put them in Volume 4, right?
Yeah. But, I mean, the same person who showed Martin, I found a lot of the Italian left-wing protest books because he took me to a nice anarchist club in Milan where they said, oh, if the police raid, we're not quite legal, if the police raid, don't worry if the police raid us while I'm looking at these books. And, you know, that was the fact, I mean, that's the other side of the coin of the propaganda books, the protest books.
And do you forgive me, I can't remember precisely, despite my thorough reading of the book this afternoon. Are there protest books that go up to now? Like,
yes.
Is there a protest book from 2011?
Temporary Spaces.
By Ben Roberts. And today I just acquired another book on that same protest. Right. In other words, of course, now we know that most of the images from protests are disseminated on the internet, but still people do make books. Why the books in the 60s and 70s, the great protest period, 68 and all that, really lent themselves to this book is because it's beyond the days of the internet. So in Japan alone, there are about 90 protest books from this period, and they're very strong graphically. And of course, they would have a whip round, they get the money, and they publish these books, you know, often quite bad quality, which added to the sort of vibrancy of them. And the same happened, you told us the story about how Tano in Italy would go around, and that's how EI 77 got published, wasn't it?
They're a good example of this personalization tendency as well, because the protesters want a photo diary of their protest. So Tano went around with a bin bag and they just put small amounts of money in until he had enough to go. He went to about 2 or 3 printers and they wouldn't do it. And then he found a printer who was going bankrupt, so he was quite glad to do it. But a leading Italian designer did the design, so it's an incredibly elegant looking book, and yet when you actually look at it, the production is quite crude. So it's got this incredible combination of crudeness and elegance, which is really interesting.
One thing that fascinates me, we know, like in this room, we know what the audience for photo books is now, but do you know, as you know, some of the only historians of this material, do you know much about the audience for these, you know, for protest books in Italy? Do you know who was buying them? Are they
the protesters?
But they're buying them and sharing them.
I mean,
but it's
I think
such a weird
I
thing to do.
can tell you a little story that John Sarkowski once said, that when he went to MoMA, he was interested in photo books, of course. He said, oh, you know, I wanted to change the whole culture of the photo book. They did an edition of 200 and they cost $12. He said, I wanted to change all that. So when I did the animals with Gary Winogrand, I persuaded the trustees to spring for a print run of 15,000. Yes, he said, they were an edition of 500 and they sold 200. He said, I wanted to change all that. You know, if they were $1, loads of people would buy them. He said, we sprang from 15,000 and they were $1 each, he said, and we still only sold 200.
No, it's worth a bit.
But there are some of the books that are in Volume 3 which I just find it really hard to imagine who the photographers thought the audience was. It's almost as if they were presciently imagining a future where there was this kind of interest.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
I was thinking about something like Amazonia, which is a very strange book. I don't know if you could say a little bit about that, because it's a really remarkable book. It's one of those things where, as Martin says, I'm very lucky that I get to go down and usually I'm going with a very specific purpose. Like, Martin, I need to look at books on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he will say, yeah, but there's this great book about the Amazon, which you need to see, which sidetracks me. But that's a really strange book, and I always wonder, that's in volume 3, right?
It is, yeah.
And I always wonder what the audience was for that book.
Well, it got suppressed, didn't it? It was censored, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very strange, because it was a protest book. I mean, it's an environmental protest book with this kind of hippie hallucinatory drug bit at the end of it, you know, the Indians taking drugs. But it had this kind of, it was really, it's kind of throwback. I mean, it's later than the kind of hippie era, but it's a sort of throwback to it in a strange kind of way. So it's documentary, it's protest, and then there's this kind of.
We should tell them who it's done by. George Love and Claudia Angela.
Angela, yeah.
And they photographed the Amazon, and George Love, who is married to Claudia, he photographed from above, and then she lands in the forest, and she got to know these indigenous tribes there, and got to know them quite well, and started interacting with them. They were all chewing this leaf that sent them slightly.
And it was the Yanomami Indians, and we're all missing it. We had to get back home for 9 o'clock. But David Beckham has just made a trip. This documentary, it's on tonight. He went and hung out with the Yanomamis.
He should solve everything there, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the point about the book is that it's a wonderful narrative where you start up in the air and then you come down, and then suddenly she throws in film in. So the craziness of what she discovered produces this most remarkable narrative. So in terms of the story and flow through the book, it's one of the best hidden examples. And it became very rare because when it was published, the Brazilian government were very upset by this, and they just killed it. And therefore, most copies got destroyed, and that's why it's so so incredibly rare to find.
That does happen to a lot of books too. You know, the Watanabe, the gangs of Shinjuku. I think there were 500 or 1,000, and people have disputed that. But you know, half of those got destroyed in a flood, and so that kind of often happen. I mean, I think what happened to a lot of these photo books is the photographers ended up with a great pile under the bed, and then they just got lost. But I mean, the thing about the Amazonia book is it's 3 different kinds of books in one. And I think one of the things about our categories, I mean, they are very general. They had to be general. I think I said at some point, if the book was any good, it could be in at least 3 categories. And I think that's quite important. You know, it kind of has a complexity. We're looking for complex books, even although they seem to be simple.
And maybe just one more question before we bring Hannah in and look at some more material. You mentioned China, like having discovered China, and the great thing about, and this really fits with the way that Tate in particular thinks about art. I mean, we try to think about art in a very global way, to have researchers and specialist curators specializing in different regions and really making, you know, as you do, I know, very many research trips to find, you know, as in our case, rare minimalists from Venezuela rather than rare photo book artists from Venezuela. But is there anything that you feel is, I hesitate to say left, but do you think that you've now really found all these little pockets of things, or do you think there's still something?
I think it's a very good question. It's something that I'm constantly thinking about. And I was aware of the Italian fascist books, and then just suddenly about 6 weeks ago, I'm offered a collection of Iranian books about the war and the revolution, and I see these pictures and I think, these are amazing. And I end up buying this collection and suddenly think, well, hang on, Iran is a very interesting country. I haven't been there. It's one of the few countries where there's a photographic culture that I haven't visited. And of course, we know they're very good filmmakers, they're very good photographers. You know, we had recently at Somerset House an exhibition of Iranian contemporary photographers. It's a very interesting place. You have all these other complexes like the Shah and the propaganda surrounding that. You have the war and the revolution. And so now, literally in the last 3 days, I'm working, because I met someone at the weekend, a new Iranian artist. I'm now working on my invitation to go to Tehran, because I need to get an invite, because you can't just turn up. It's difficult to get the visa. in order that I can go to the bookshops, find people who know about what's going on. I'm meeting a guy in New York in 2 weeks' time who runs a bookshop in New York, secondhand, who's Iranian, and he was the guy that collected together these books. So you think, suddenly I'm onto something here. So there aren't many pockets like that left. But when you find them, you think, right, this is my chance now to try and build up as a complete picture as possible. But I don't think there's going to be any big surprises, because photo books need, money, and basically you're not going to be finding a hidden history of photo books from Ethiopia. Because in Africa, we all know South Africa is a big country. North Africa had some cash around, but these places really don't have much. So you get the travel guides, you get propaganda often associated with that, especially if it's a regime, a dictatorial.
The themes that you've put out in Volume 3 actually do indicate some places. Now, as you say, like totalitarian regimes, we see in lots of places, and you can imagine, as you say, you can imagine that being a very fruitful.
Yes.
Kind of thing
well,
to
follow. The
quality
of the propaganda chapters within the Chinese photo book, and the 6 chapters is almost like a read of a history of China, but the 2 or 3 chapters that deal with the propaganda books, published, of course, by the communists in China, the production values, especially in the 50s, were astonishing. I mean, the books are absolutely beautiful. I mean, the quality, there's no inhibition in terms of production price or anything like that. They made the most beautiful books. And that's very exciting. And then they also made very cheap books that were handed out cheaply. And then you have censorship, a bit like David King and all the work he's done on censorship on the Lisitsky and Rodchenko books. You have the same thing where Li Bao is taken out of the pictures. And so we've got a whole section that shows how censorship operated there, and the various people that Mao executed and took out of his, he basically murdered them, and how then they would have to be taken out of the books.
That's fantastic. It's like each of these things is a whole another entire history. I'm going to bring Hannah in, and then we'll come back and have some more discussion. So you have some images as well, which I think they're going to come up automatically, and that's the changery thing.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to kind of bring in the role of the influence of the book on publishing and the kind of production of new photo books. I mean, I've been working with Trolley since 2005, so just after the first volume came out and just before the second one. And I think that it's true to say that even since then, in between these 2 volumes, there's been a huge amount of change in the photo book publishing world, and that is, as Chris mentioned, it is a lot to do with your influence. It was actually quite nice to have the opportunity to look at all 3 books at once. Simon was the same. We sat down solidly and we did look at everything properly, which is, in this kind of busy times, it's rare to have that opportunity. And it was a genuine pleasure to have the chance to look, not just as the publisher when it first comes out and you rush to see if your book is in it, and you scan the pages going trolley, 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 Mac, trying to see if you're in it, and then you kind of lose interest on if you're not in there. So it was nice to have that. No, but it was good to.
5 Trolley 2.
No, I didn't count Mac, but we're 4, which I thought was not a bad kind of tally. But it was like an immense learning experience, because what I kind of didn't, I kind of took slightly for granted is the fact that your huge amount of knowledge and history, and the fact that before you started doing these photo books, there wasn't anything that existed of this level. There was no introduction, there was no one doing this kind of thing. And as a kind of resource and historical guide, I think they're absolutely kind of unparalleled. So even if there isn't another edition 4, I think that this kind of platform is an incredible start. But also I can see how there has to be more. The Chinese book, the more specialist, it's like literally, it's the tip of the iceberg. There are just so many things and avenues to explore. It's kind of an exponential field, which is very exciting. And then the other thing I kind of noticed, apart from being very educational and historical, was the fact that you pick up on new photo books, you champion things, especially in the last volume. You make an effort to, well, maybe not even make an effort, but you definitely bring in the kind of the new young publishers, young photographers, new photo books. I think that even the latest book was published in 2013.
That's right.
Which was the...
Be Happy.
Was it?
It's the last book we put in.
Be Happy, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was literally a year ago now. at
Literally,
the
okay.
It
first.
was a year ago because we discovered it at the Vienna Photobook Festival
Yeah.
last year.
Okay, there we go.
It was a hot book of that festival in the way that Nicolo's book was a hot festival book in Bristol.
Exactly.
People
So,
will listen to you, eh?
well, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of examples that you've included in Volume 3 that I personally, because the whole thing is, I mean, it is very subjective. I mean, you've kind of defined a role that can be seen as, you know, objective in many ways, but it is basically you two using your huge amount of knowledge. I don't know anyone else who you would ever kind of bring in as a kind of equal in that sense. But the first book is a book that I'm actually this is a personal loss actually, because I was first introduced to this book in 2010, and I was doing a workshop in Madrid for Foto España, and the idea was that different young photographers would bring in their dummies of their books, and you know, sometimes you see a project which is, you know, it gets you excited, it has that thing, you have that gut feeling, and it's what you look at for when you're a publisher. You know, Martin, I'm sure you get excited, Gerry, you get excited when you see a book. It's a genuine, you know, gut reaction that something is original, that they're doing something different. And because there's a huge proliferation of photo books now, I think it's hard to stand out, and you have to have that kind of extra dimension. So anyway, this book is by Ricardo Cases, a Spanish photographer, and the story of the book is basically, this is his mother's hometown in the kind of east coast of Spain, and this is a sport that they genuinely do, which is painting the wings of the male pigeons, and they fly around the little town, and they take it very seriously. So they all have kind of different colours, names like racehorses, and the idea is that they chase this female pigeon round, and then they have a referee who judges the most successful male, and then you know, there's a trophy and there's all kinds of probably celebrations afterwards, but they take it very seriously. So anyway, I was very struck by the way that the photographer had really thought about the format, the whole book as an object, and I think that this is a new thing, whether it's the influence of the you know, the photo book directly as a resource for younger photographers to be aware of, you know, books that have come out historically or what's kind of, you know, around at the moment. But it was very exciting that he'd actually put this together, and I know that self-publishing is not a kind of new genre. I remember we published Philip Jones Griffiths, and his first book back in 1971 was almost kind of self-published because he raised the money himself by taking photos of Jackie Onassis on holiday in Cambodia, and then you know, he designed it all. He was very clear about how he wanted that book to look. So it's not a new thing, and I think you pick up on that a lot.
The first photo book was self-published.
Exactly, you mentioned that, which I didn't know, but it's in the photo book you talk a lot about that self-publishing is not a new phenomenon, but it's only kind of in recent years that
we didn't treat it as a genre, so to speak.
No.
It's just a method of.
Just a method, yeah.
And of course, I mean, all those classic American aperture books of the 70s were essentially self-published because the photographers had to pay for them.
Yeah, so that nothing's changed.
No, no.
But yeah, so publishing it's not an easy world. So whether you're a photographer or a publisher, printing something is a hugely expensive investment. So I think anyone who makes a book is genuinely, you know, passionate about making it happen. And you have to kind of survive and think about how you want it to exist in its context, because, you know, it's the whole kind of package. Bringing me to the next book, Cristina de Medel. So she, going back to Ricardo, what happened was that I went back to London and I took the dummy and I showed it to Gigi, who was my partner in Trolley, and I said, "What do you think?" And he's like, I don't know. And so him and Ricardo talked for a few months, and then they were talking in Spanish, so I didn't understand. And then it basically turned out that Gigi, he felt sorry for the pigeon, and he thought it was like a gang rape. So we never did it. And then, of course, when I opened Volume 3, and there it is, and I said, well, you know, the one that got away. But anyway.
Like the pigeon.
Like the pigeon. The little pigeon that flew off. So another book, another Spanish photographer is Cristina Medel. So she also self-published this book, The Afronauts. And she was kind of relatively unknown. And she put this all, together herself, a few hundred copies, the whole design, the content. So it's not just, straight photography. A lot of other kind of elements have been brought in, maps, diagrams, vernacular photography, her own images. So there's kind of this blurring of the boundary of the content. And also the jacket I'm wearing is part of the whole collection, which is her collaboration with a local designer. And so the power of this book, basically, she ended up being nominated for the Deutsche Bourse Prize, and she went from kind of relative obscurity to being, it was through this book, and so it was a kind of very, demonstrates the kind of power of this medium when you really get it right, when you really understand the context of the work that you're doing and present it in a very kind of original way. Similar to the Nicoleau's book, which is also, he did all of that himself, he designed it, he thought of the context, and it's very exciting. And then
that is, it's something to say, isn't it? It's really exciting when it's usually Martin, but not always Martin, shows you something like Ephronauts.
Yeah.
You've never seen it before.
Did Martin show you Ephronauts?
I think so, yeah.
I can't remember. I
think
was
it
an
is.
early believer in astronauts, I remember that.
Well, this is the thing, because,
I remember I got her to drop one off you in Arles, remember?
I know, I've ended up with
you
3
got-
copies by default.
That's great.
Yes.
I haven't got one, you see. That's why I had to go on the internet and find
We'll
one.
do a deal later, okay?
Okay, I've got Ricardo's dummy.
I think it was Gossage who put,
Well, I've got one. It's probably not the original.
I remember Gossage talking about it, and then now he's become an unbeliever again about it.
Really?
Yeah,
He's lost faith.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, the next thing I wanted to kind of just bring in quickly was, I was trying to think of what, that you can't include everything. There must be bits that you've missed. You know that. It's a kind of difficult process. So I was actually trying to think of an example of a book that I liked, that I was looking for, and it was actually quite hard. I don't know whether you tried to find a book that you wanted to be in it that wasn't.
I have a personal favourite, which is a strange book about a naked Japanese fire breather, which I don't think will ever get into any photobook compilation, but I think it's my problem.
It's very serendipity. I mean, there's a Slovakian book, The Tragedy of a Venus, and another Slovakian artist did an intervention on this where she reproduced the whole book and then put the word, whore all over it.
Whore, yeah.
I mean, because the book is about women, famous women, sex model, sex role, not a sex model, and so on. And I told Marta about this book. At least doesn't sound like a very good idea, but she just happened to be. We were sitting again in Vienna. She was just walking by, and I said, "Oh, Martin, there's that Slovenian. I told you about this book." And she said, "Oh, I just have a copy in my handbag." Of course, then he loves it, and she's in. Very lucky girl. And the same with the Be Happy guy, wasn't it? Anybody who said in Vienna, "Have you bought any books?" "Oh yeah, I've seen this Russian book, Be Happy." Everybody, 50 copies gone instantly.
Well, the one this is my personal one, is the Nick Wampington book, Living Room. It was kind of hard to find a book that wasn't in there, because I think...
That's in there.
Is it?
Yes.
Where?
You sure?
I don't think...
I
don't
don't
think it
really
is.
know what's in there.
Oh,
I
right.
double checked.
because
Is it or not? Because
I think what we did in the
yeah,
end,
it's
we
father.
decided to,
Yeah.
it was either that or Raise a Laugh at the
Yeah.
time. And in the end, we went for Raise a Laugh.
Is it? I couldn't
Well, Raise
find
a
any...
Laugh definitely in.
Yeah, Razor Laugh is in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think that's why
Yeah.
it was on our radar, because we all know it's
Yeah.
a good book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, now you mention it, of course, yes, it could easily have gone in.
Well, I was bringing it up as an example because it was actually quite hard to find something
things
that
do
wasn't.
slip out at the last minute
Well,
as well. When
yeah.
Fiden
It
tells
can't
us we have
be-
to lose 3 pages, so things slip out. And we can't always remember what slips out.
Sad to be one of the photographers who was on one of those 3 pages.
Yeah, kill you, know.
And then just to kind of round up the next volume, so there's a couple of books that I want to kind of use as examples of what's happening now with photobook publishing, because it's actually a very kind of dynamic scene at the moment. It's very, it's totally buzzing. I mean, when I joined Trolley in 2005, it was totally different. It was a kind of a very uncertain, kind of negative future. And then in the past few years, it's just kind of taken off a lot more. And I used to go to, book fairs. They weren't even photo book fairs, but book fairs like Frankfurt. And I used to feel like the youngest person there by, like 20, 30 years. And now I go to, there's a whole host of like photo book fairs.
Those awful guys who are only like 20.
They're so young. I mean, I feel old, and it's totally flipped and gone on its head. But for example, this book, Lorenzo Vittori, this came out last year.
We missed it. It came out in November. We have to.
But you would have put it in.
For us.
No, it could. We closed in June.
You closed in June.
It would have
Okay.
definitely been in.
So it's going in. Okay. Then will there be a 4? Maybe.
Oh, we don't know yet. I mean,
But also,
if there is, I guarantee on our sword tonight, we will put
on
this
your sword.
in.
Okay. What about
Because I love it.
this one? This one's
Yeah,
a great
well,
one.
That's one
we
of
all
my
love it.
favourites.
We love this one.
That also
This is
came out
great.
after.
Afterwards. So these are going in the next one.
Yeah.
This has turned into a preview.
That's right.
Great.
Yeah. In fact, forget volume 3. Let's just talk about volume 4. Let's have a vote. Who else? What else should we put in? Suggestions from the floor are welcome.
But this was great because of the format of it. It's like the Economist magazine, and I thought it was just quite ironic because the magazine world is totally kind of crumbling, and then all of a sudden the photo book world is kind of flourishing. So this kind of book about the economy in Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain is quite funny because it's using a magazine format. Ironically, I thought I'd end with a photo of a trolley.
Yeah, but photography is so damn good. And the same with Paloma and Iris.
Yeah.
The photography is good. That's the thing about it.
Yeah, but the kind of young photo book publishers that are going on, like Morel Books, Here Press, Self-Publish Be Happy, who did the Lorenzo Vittori. I mean, this is a kind of exciting. I mean, I know that when you talk about the photo book, you do reference photographers looking at it a lot. So you always say, I love asking photographers what their favourite book is. Yeah. And the fun thing is, when I was kind of thinking about this talk, I was thinking, I was asking all publishers. I was asking Aaron, I was asking Harry, I was asking Bruno, and so I just kind of thought that it was a kind of interesting, kind of era that's going on with photo books. And
something I wanted to ask you a little bit to reflect on was just this idea of, and I'd like to ask you all to comment on this, but there is obviously a problem with younger photographers showing work in galleries. There are fewer, it seems to me, very few spaces to show work in London in particular. And do you think that and we have, as you said, a fantastic photo book, self-publishing and independent publishing community. Are those two things related? Does the fact that we have...
Well, it's much easier to bring out a book, especially with print on demand, than it is to get a show, unless you have the show in your own bedroom or something.
But do you think that do you think that photographers have been kind of not forced, but sort of encouraged in the direction of publishing because of the lack of opportunity?
For sure, and of course the magazines, the fact that they, longer do we see documentary or stories about the real world, in the Sunday supplements at the weekend. We're seeing a lot more frothy lifestyle stuff. So there is there's a shortage of opportunities and platforms to actually see serious work. And there's a bigger audience out there, because the one thing that has happened in the last decade, along with the internet, is the audience for photography has got bigger, because Flickr's started up. Look at the number of millions of people on that. Facebook, as you know, there's 2 million pictures loaded every day, or whatever it is. It's something extraordinary. So when you have shows and books, the audience is always getting bigger. It is the greatest democratic art form in the world. So there's a hunger to sort of find new outlets. But one thing we should say about books is that there's a lot of bad books published. And in fact, I always maintain we need the bad books to understand the good ones. Because the thing about a book, when it suddenly shows up and you're excited about it, it's because it has got that sort of difference. It's got that magic that comes out through the production, through the images. And because we see so many books that are sort of don't really hit that button, they're not great, you need them all in order to really appreciate and understand when you see something that's special.
Well, I think that the young publishers that are kind of doing so well, apart from the self-publishing, I mean, Bruno with Self-Publish Be Happy gave a huge platform for all these self-published books. And if I go to portfolio reviews and someone gives me a body of work and says, I want to make a book out of it, and they've made no effort at all to think about how how it would be, not even kind of get some spray mat and stick it together, a concept. I think, well, it's never going to get to that extra level. And you know, the publisher now is often like a curator, because they will choose projects, and it's a kind of a different world, because they are filtering however many projects are out there. It's not a given that your work will necessarily be a good book, but it does, you know.
And going back to the gallery question, I mean, there just aren't that many collectors out there. I mean, I often think about, you know, what's being sold at Paris Photo, all this work on display there, what percentage is being sold? I mean, I know there was an auction at Sotheby's a couple of weeks ago. All right, mate, it's 1.2 million, which sounds like an awful lot of money, but about 3/4 of that was taken up by 2 lots. And, you know, well over 50% was unsold. So there aren't...
That was London as well, I think.
Yes.
Maybe get higher
yes, I
prices
know, but, you know,
in Paris.
all over, there are, you know, $5,000 for a photograph. There aren't that many people going around spending even $5,000 on a photograph, and as you know, I mean, they could go for a lot more than that.
I mean, this is a tough market for selling prints in the UK. You know, we still have this historical baggage that photography is basically a bit of a craft, you know. And you compare this to, say, America, which still is perhaps the biggest market for the buying and selling of photographs, where in New York alone there's 60 galleries showing contemporary photography. In London we have 3 or 4.
But even it's hard. Even there it's hard.
It's not easy, but it's possible.
But the photo book for a young artist, it should and can lead to sales of prints. Do you find that with the gallery?
Someone like Christina Vidal, she's a great example. You know, 3 years ago no one knew who she was. 2 years ago she published Afronauts. Now, of course, in the wake of Afronauts, as well as the book becoming very collectible and very expensive, she has shows in festivals. I mean, she has the busiest calendar I know of any young photographer, and she's doing other projects. You know, she's on the scene. So that one book literally launched a career, which is, you know, continues to grow, and now she's an established name. How you become established in 2 years is quite amazing, but she's achieved it.
It's really exciting. That is a really exciting thing.
I'm actually curating an exhibition in Paris next week, and they actually asked, well, we want you to do, you know, choose something that maybe you've never had the chance to do. So I'm actually curating a show with Ricardo Cassés, the pigeon work. So I'll let you know how it goes in the gallery context. But he was actually interesting as well, because when I spoke to him and I said that Ricardo would like to exhibit your work, and he actually had, in the same way that he had the book ready-made, he actually had the exhibition already in his head, and he was bringing in sculptures, and it was different formats, and he'd really kind of put it together as a kind of exhibition as well, which I wasn't expecting, but in hindsight it kind of made sense that he'd, you know, thought about it. But yeah, we'll see.
That sounds fantastic.
Yeah. No.
Gigi will be extremely upset with you doing a show of pigeon rape, but we'll let that go. Let's open the questions to the floor. So hopefully all of those of you, you're all going to now be put under one giant spotlight by the looks of things. There's one question at the back I can see. Please wait for the microphone and try and catch my eye if you want.
Thanks so much for a really interesting discussion. There's lots of really interesting points raised there. I just wanted to pick up one thing, Martin, you were saying about, you know, you need the bad photo books to know what the good ones are. In your experience, what really stands out as being a sort of real clanger? Are there certain things that you just... Is it very instinctive, very guttural?
You name names?
Not names, no, but is it anything to do with the design or the actual materials that the books are made out of, or the work itself?
It's a good question. I think it's a combination of two things. First, it's very lazy. You can sort of... I mean, when you're viewing work, not only in book form but in folio work, you can sort of tell the amount of effort that's gone into a photograph pretty quickly, into not just one photograph, but into a series of photographs. People get infatuated by this whole idea that in order to be a successful artist or photographer, I must get my book out. So basically, most people publish their book too early, and it hasn't really got the body of work which carries it. Because ultimately, you know, we can talk about production, design, all these issues. Unless a book has got great photographs in, it's never going to work. So, you know, really, that's the bottom line, is that, you know, it shouldn't have been published. I mean, it's okay, you sell it to a few friends, and then it just sort of stagnates and it goes dead. You know, you can, this whole idea of how much has gone into it is so important. You can just smell the effort and the dedication of a good project when you open it up pretty quickly. I mean, it's ironic to say, but it probably takes me 20 seconds to understand if a book is any good. Then I'll look at it further, of course. But that instant moment of whether you get the project and you get what someone's trying to address and trying to explain, that sort of mystery, that connection they've made to the subject, which is so crucial to what makes good work, you can tell it very quickly. And most of the time, it doesn't happen. And when it does, it leaps out at you. And that's the great joy of seeing a really good project or indeed a book.
Well, more often it leaps out at you, and then afterwards we have to follow along afterwards slowly. I'm looking around for... I can't see very well. Have another question? There's one here. Yeah, but just wait for the microphone. Thank you.
Given the subject of the talk, you're obviously focused on photo books, but you haven't said a lot about the internet and where it's going to take us and the role of digital books. I'm just interested on your view.
Well, I think apps and digital books have a role to play, and it's one of the discussions that we had in the Bristol Festival was, in the end, they will complement the book. But the thing about a book is the physicality that it's so exciting. The other great bonus about the book is that you've got it, you've paid for it, and one of the things that happen if you buy well, is your book is not only something you can enjoy, but it also is a great investment because the price goes up. The price never goes up with an app. And of course, the internet is hugely important in terms of how we devour photography. But that's why, despite the internet, the book has had such a strong decade. I think it's almost like an antidote to the internet, where we are so dominated now by that screen, the actual physicality and opening it up, the peeling of pages, turning the pages, and having the sort of real impact of that book coming at you is so important. And it's almost because it's the antidote that I think it's doing so well.
There were a couple of really interesting things that came up. One of them at Bristol, actually, and another thing which Mac are doing, who you mentioned, which are these online digital versions of very, very hard to find out of print, often 19th century books. This is very, very interesting because
this is a good role.
Very few of us can own a pencil of nature, but it's very interesting to be able to see, one of the first photo books and to look through the sequence. There are certain parts of a photo book which do work online, the sequencing in particular, being able to see the whole of something rather than just a couple of pages. And the other thing that was shown at Bristol, which I thought was amazing, was Self-Published Be Happy's 89 Plus, this work that was essentially an album with music. It was 89 photographers born after 1989, and it was done as a sort of slideshow with a soundtrack. It was really impressive. It's not really a book, but it really comes from the same place as photo book publishing. It comes from the same intelligence.
Dan Golden started. It was originally a slideshow.
Yeah.
Well, we did a book, Gentlemen of the Congo, which we actually got some developers to make into an app. And it got rejected by Apple because there was music. And they said they didn't know where to put it in the Apple store. So, it was bizarre. So it was it was a learning curve. But I've spent like $2.99 on a photo book and been quite disappointed. I'd spend 50 quid on a proper book. But I bought a kind of an e-book of a photo book, and it was just like a PDF. And I was like, I can't believe I just spent $2.99 on that, which is nothing. But it was just relative because I thought it was so throwaway and so kind of, 2D and without any kind of...
I think a successful app really has to deliver something more than just a PDF of a book, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I think there's a place for e-books, exhibition catalogues, for instance, where you just want the information.
Yeah, if it's just content, then...
Yes.
But reading the object, a lot of those kind of new books are about the object. They've thought about the kind of the fabric, the texture, the paper, the whole thing.
It's
3D, it's not.
Reaction against the e-book, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
But I hope it's not the last hurrah either. I don't, somewhere I have a sneaky feeling that the New York, the William Klein, in fact, we can't call them digital photo books now. What was the phrase I came up with in interactive whatever? I've got to fit some kid is working on the one which will hit, and then there'll be a tipping point. I hope not, but I remember talking about the physicality of the book in an evening like this in Chicago about 6 years ago, and we were all talking exactly as Martin, the physicality, blah, blah, blah. And who wants to look at pictures on a screen? And then some kid got up and said, "You're a bunch of old fogies, you're all talking horse shit." And I don't know. He might have been right. I don't know.
Anybody like to ask these old fogies a question? Yeah, there's one here.
Hi, I'm French, and I've recently seen a French publisher, La Martinière, publishing a book from pictures they had seen on Instagram from an Instagram photographer. I wanted to know what you thought about mobile photography and how you could go from online to a photo book.
I mean, I have an iPhone, but the only time I ever use it is to take photos of book covers that I haven't bought yet. So I've never taken a selfie, although lots of people.
There's a selfie on the Fiden
But
website.
Arranges it.
We were coerced into that, weren't we?
Yeah, but no, I think Instagram and all these other platforms are all part of the health of photography, and it's been a phenomenal success. So, and of course, inevitably there will be the first Instagram book. And we have in Magnum, for example, someone who came in last year, Michael Christopher Brown, who is an Instagram photographer. So, I think, of course, they're going to be embraced. They're just part of the whole excitement of photography is that there are all these platforms. They're all interconnected. They can all, be with each other. And things, of course, can cross over. I know, for example, at the Magnum AGM, which is in 2 weeks' time, we've made a limited edition Instagram sign print for $100 as a sort of 3-day one-off event. So everyone's getting there. We all understand that these things are available, but they can complement other, exhibitions and books. So they're just part of the excitement of how it all functions out there. And the sky's the limit. So I'm all for it. But I don't have an Instagram account myself.
There's all of a sudden loads of questions, so right there somewhere.
Hi, just looking at the photographs up on screen and thinking about my connection to taking photographs as a way of sort of possessing a place and being part of something and then translating it into your own language and talking a lot about the book, why the book perhaps is successful as something that you can possess. And I suppose I hadn't thought about that quite so much, as when you go into a gallery, you feel like something is very much apart from you. You can't have it in that same way. Whereas the amazing sense of collecting and having this thing, it being your own, having it in your house. And I wondered if you thought that photo books would be as successful, as interesting, if you weren't able to have them yourself.
Well, as a collector, I have this terrible bug, and it means that when I see something that I really enjoy, I want to have a copy. But, that's an addiction that I know, I should go and go to a clinic, really. I should check in, actually. So, yes, I personally want to own it if I see something I really enjoy. But I know it's not necessary to, it's just my own personal makeup, my own problem.
Do you, Gerry, I know, collects books as well.
No, I don't. I mean, I wouldn't describe myself as a collector of books. There are...
How many thousands have we got?
Well, not that many. But there are certain books that, I'm interested in the photographer, I'm interested in the work and things, and I will get them. So eventually the actual thing I was a collector of was photographs back in the day when you couldn't give them away. But I wouldn't say I was particularly a book collector, because I remember I horrified Martin. I sold a first edition of the Americans and bought 30 kind of just current books. Actually, you'd get more than 30. You'd get more than 30 these days. But yeah. I sold the first edition Americans, bought a later edition of the Americans, then bought 30 other kind of current books with that, and he was horrified.
Do you collect?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, it's an addiction. Second of all, it's an expensive one. I mean, it's nice to be able to own it, but I think you kind of go in and you just throw you know, your credit card behind you, because it's not gonna, you can't compromise on the expense. But also sometimes the books they're limited edition, and they're not really designed to be more than a few thousand copies. So there's this kind of idea that limiting it gives it kind of more value, and you end up kind of spending more money. So it's kind of a vicious circle. I think, you know, the first one's for free, and then you end up paying for it for the rest of your life. But yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know. There's a shared ownership. I think that the book, even if you don't have one, you might covet it. I mean, how many books have we talked about? I wish we had that tonight. But it's a kind of, I've
got a theory that one of the reasons that you're able to collect so effectively is because you haven't had to move very often.
Well, I can't move now.
Exactly.
I mean, it's as simple as that, yes.
I just have to keep moving house, and every time I move house, I think I'm not buying any more books. Like they're so heavy, it's so painful.
Yeah, but then it doesn't feel like your house unless you've got all your books there.
True. That's also true.
I mean, I think as professionals in the business, we can at least make the excuse we need a working library rather than a collection.
Tax deductible as well. So there were a couple more questions. I think it'll probably be the last ones, will they not? Okay, so there were a couple more in the middle. There's one there and one here, I think.
I just wanted to ask about your relationship with Phaidon. Because
very good.
I'm interested in how you put books together, and the fact that obviously you've done your own books, and you're so bookish, the two of you, and visual, but so therefore you must have cared a lot about what the book would look like, and yet you were doing all this hard work, compiling the material. So did you hand it all over to Phaidon and they just put it together and you were pleased with the result, or was there a lot of sort of, you know, toing and froing on really?
No, I mean, we have a great production manager. She's here, Victoria, and we have a fantastic designer, and he came up with the original concept on Volume 1. Of course, he's been continuing to work on it. And when we get to the spreads, you know, we're juggling the whole thing about what books go big, which books have a full double-page spread. So we have a whole dialogue, really, and we look at this, and we comment, and we get there and we slowly resolve how the thing looks. So there's quite a bit of process in terms of the design, and particularly in, you know, the emphasis that we give on certain books. We obviously, if it have a double-page spread, it has to make sure that it looks really good. So it's a very pleasurable process of dialogue and building to make the book look as handsome as possible.
In Volume 3, as you get to the more contemporary chapters, if you look at the last 5 or 6 books, they are books we think are particularly important. So
And
if you think of the last book in the whole book, we think it's particularly important.
And just in kind of terms of format, when we did a book called Trolleyology, which is about us, 10 years, and we actually looked at the photo book as the kind of format of how to present a book of books, how to do the covers, the spreads, and it's weird because I thought that a book about, I mean, we did it for Gigi and we did it for our kind of 10th anniversary, but I thought it was kind of a personal book that wouldn't be that kind of have a huge appeal. But the funny thing is, at these photo festivals, there's a lot of people that actually have bought the book, knowing nothing about Trolley, but just really enjoyed the idea of a book about books. And I think that also is the appeal of the photo book. It's just this very aesthetic, interesting compilation of information, and yeah, it's a kind of very attractive formula.
The thing that I love about it as well, which is, I think, not completely revolutionary, but there was that Spanish book that kind of did it before, but you really photograph them as objects.
Exactly.
So they're photographed in a very, very sensitive way. So rather than just spreads from the book, it's actually photographing an object and making it look like a thing in the world, which I think is really important because you get a sense of the history and the objecthood of the thing, which really is quite a big achievement for a two-dimensional publication. You know, it's really quite a remarkable thing actually to give a sense of what these things actually might feel like and might smell like, and from the way they're.
Am I right in thinking the shadows were put in digitally this time?
Probably they're fake
Weren't.
shadows.
They were taken from the real shadows.
Right, they were photoshopped.
Amazing. So maybe one more question, if there was one. There was one at some point, right in the middle. Yeah, somebody right there in the middle. And then afterwards, I should say, you're going to sign copies of the book outside, I believe.
Absolutely.
and we're all going to run out. There's going to be a stampede to find out what the last book is. Find out.
I can't remember either.
Sorry, so the last question
yeah.
here.
Hi, I was just wondering how easy the books you selected fell into the chapters, the genres, like, or did you have the books first and then create the different genres, or did you create the genres first and then sort of curate the books into the different genres? If you know what I mean.
As Gerry's already pointed out, many of the books could have gone in 3 or 4 different chapters. I mean, there are certain things like protest and propaganda which were much more clearly defined. But then when you get identity and memory and social, these are all very interplayed. So that was quite fun. We tried to make and put the books so there was some kind of argument. Gerry would have an idea about what the particular point that he would be making about that genre, and of course that really helped us to identify which books should be where. But as he says, many of them could have gone all over the place.
And also, we tried to get, without making big things trailing through. So one thing that was quite interesting was this kind of street fashion genre, which began with Watanabe in the late 60s and goes through to people like Vivian. There was a book called Imaginary Club, which I kept telling him, I think we should have that in. But he hadn't really, the photographer, it's an obsessive subject about youth culture and clubs and things like that. And he never really made the book that we were both totally happy with. And he has now, unfortunately. It came out too late. And we would have happily put the new version in, wouldn't we, Martin?
It's going in volume 4.
Yeah. But we spread them all out on the floor and talk about them and say, oh no, I don't like that. And then Martin said, oh, this one has to be in. We have 5 jokers each where neither of us can argue against it. So we're trying not to reveal our hand all.
Was it 5?
It was 5 each, yeah. Right. Trying not to reveal our hand all the time. See if we can persuade him to put this one in and I don't have to play it as a joker or all this kind of thing. But we're always looking for connections between the books.
Can I ask one last question? I'm going to take the chairman's prerogative. Have you ever really, really fallen out over a book that one of you really thought should go in and the other one really didn't?
Because we respect each other too much to know.
That's a very diplomatic answer.
No, yes. Of course. What would you expect?
We haven't really...
There was one book that actually... Gerry said, if that goes in, I'm taking my name off the book.
That's what I wanted to
no, it was because it was a book about Bosnian camouflage, wasn't it, from the Bosnian War? Handbook. And he discovered it. He thought it was written by a Nazi, so we had to take it out.
It was written by a neo-Nazi, and I think Fiden are quite glad to have dodged that bullet.
Now you've got a whole chapter dedicated to the original Nazis and totalitarians. So
it's all
swings
and
roundabouts.
Simon, let's get this clear. They are part of the propaganda chapter.
We always like to get the Führer in. Come on.
So on that bombshell, I'd like to thank Gerry and Martin and Hannah very much and invite you, as many of you as can fit through the door in a big crush, to the signing outside. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.